Hello, and welcome to Creepycore and Folklore, the show about creatures, encounters, old tales, and myths. I'm your host, Iona Wayland, a dark fantasy author, mental health professional, and overall curious person. I want to join other spooky souls and hear about these unusual stories. Hello, spooky soul, and welcome to episode 35 of Creepycore and Folklore. Today is the spring equinox. I'm so excited. I'm going to be talking about spring folklore today to celebrate the spring equinox, since it's a time of growth and change and new beginnings. I'm really excited to briefly talk about Holi and Purim as well. And I'm going to go more in depth in this episode about Ostara. Never mind. I put a Spanish twist to that. It's Ostara, or Ostara, for this episode. So I have always liked the change in season. I know I've talked about it before, but winter is usually pretty rough on me. And then living in the northern part of Appalachia can get kind of rough. It can get pretty desolate, and I live very rurally. So I could see where, like, I don't know. I get a little glum. I get a little moody, a little hibernate-y, where I just want to sleep. And there's something about, like, it's the equinoxes, I feel like, because during the fall equinox, like whenever it's autumn, and especially October is like my creative streak kind of area. I can feel that creative streak in me just like rising up again, and just like wanting to get all my creative projects like done and put together and flowing. And I just really love the new growth and beautiful colors. Also, the baby animals. There's so many babies. I'll drive to work and I'll see little calves or lambs. They're so cute. We don't breed our chickens. We just have them like to make teeny tiny eggs and then like to look pretty, I guess. They're fun. They're fun companion birds. I don't know if you can hear it, but actually there's a rooster just like screaming about how glorious spring is right now. Hopefully you can't hear him though. That would, he won't stop. It's like he wants to be in this episode. And you know what? He deserves to be. But, it's really cute because I'll see chicks everywhere, chicks for sale, and they're just really sweet and fuzzy. But I think we should start off with Holi. So Holi is a Hindu holiday that's celebrated on the 20th of March to the 21st. It's supposed to symbolize spring, love, fertility, and it's also called the Festival of Colors. Powdered dye, like the dried powdered dye, is thrown at each other, and it looks really gorgeous. It's super colorful and happy and beautiful. And that's what the color runs in the US are based off of, is this Hindu holiday. Color runs will be these like 5K or whatever, where everyone will wear white and run, and then the onlookers will throw the powdered dye at them, and then at the end of the run you kind of have like a dyed running outfit that you have. It's just so interesting because I've seen how popular color runs are, and they're always done in the spring, and I'm like, I wonder why they didn't attribute this to Holi, like say that it was based off of this. It's like a really beautiful holiday and it has a really neat story behind it. So the story behind it is that Krishna, for the sake of this, just know that he has blue skin. Krishna, the god, fell in love with Radha, and later on Radha becomes his wife, but it's kind of like their origin story of meeting each other. And he was really worried about the skin color difference, which I'm about to get into all the symbolism. Look at all the symbolism here. But he was worried about the skin color difference and wondering if that would be a problem. And so he talked to his mom about it, which I love. It's like, hey mom, I'm insecure about this and I really want to know. And she told him to ask Radha to paint his face any color she wanted. So then he became less nervous, and it was kind of like a fun thing for them to do together. And they fell in love. And what's really sweet, oh my God, I'm such a sucker for this shit. What's really sweet is that couples today will still sometimes do this where they'll paint each other's faces different colors. Or they'll go to a temple together and they'll partake in the color dye throwing. And I think that's really neat. And then in modern times, people in general who are Hindu, people to celebrate Holi will go to their temple and they'll wear like white clothes, not necessarily nice clothes, but white clothes, so that whenever they throw the powdered dye, they have that keepsake for themselves. And I just thought that was like a really sweet, like, origin story for that holiday. Also, the article itself didn't explicitly state this, but I am kind of speculating on how oftentimes, not just in India or South Asia, this is like pretty much all across the globe, that darker skin colors, or quote different than the majority skin tone, is seen as like quote too different, and often people with quote different skin tones will be told that they are like not supposed to pair up with other skin tones. And as someone from a mixed race background, and as someone who does have darker skin than, you know, my spouse, it's really cool to see like how not only was it kind of realistic, where like Krishna, who is a literal god, like a kind of a big deal, you know, god, was insecure about the skin differences. It shows like the depth of that, and it's very symbolic of it. I mean, granted, there are no blue people in the world, but I like the symbolism behind it, and that also it can be overcome. And it's something that like couples can be mindful of skin differences and how the world treats each person based on skin, and at the same time that their love and bond together can overcome that. I am getting very sappy, so I'm going to move on to the next one. So next up we have Purim, which is a Jewish holiday. So it happens on the 14th day of Adar, or Adar, and it's because the Jewish calendar doesn't necessarily use the Gregorian calendar. It can change from year to year what this means. So there was a king during the 4th century empire named King Ahasuerus, and wife Queen Vashti. And she disobeyed him in some type of way. It said that she disobeyed his direct orders. And so he wanted a new wife, so he threw a beauty pageant. Something that was really interesting, that while I was looking up information about Purim, it was really strange, because like one of the Jewish creators on Instagram that I follow, she brought up how there were some like mixed there's of course like way more nuance to this holiday, and she did like a really good job of talking about what these orders were, and like also kind of breaking apart like, yes, let's celebrate, but there are also parts of this that are really tragic and sad. And so it was like a really nuanced look at this. But she reported that Queen Vashti was ordered to dance nakedly and seductively in front of the king's court, or something like that. And it was so interesting, because whenever I looked up what Purim was, it didn't say that, or it was like that kind of information was hidden. But then when she brought that up and I looked it up a bit more, it like was under the layers of, you know, this isn't just like a cut and dry story. Like there's many different layers and points of view and perspectives to this. So I just thought that was interesting. But so he threw this beauty pageant, and Esther joined it. But she didn't reveal her Jewish heritage. So at the same time of this pageant, Haman was appointed prime minister, and he was notoriously anti-Semitic. what adds to the layers of this is that the leader of the Jewish people at the time was Mordecai, Esther's cousin. At some point during this beauty pageant, the king was very taken with Esther. I believe that they ended up like courting or maybe getting married. I wasn't really sure. It didn't, for some reason, like this, I couldn't really find, I feel like it was Queen Esther. So they must have gotten married or something. Or maybe she was one of his wives. I wasn't sure if polygamy was a thing during the 4th century Persian Empire. But so she became Queen Esther at some point. But the king ordered everyone to kneel to Haman because he was the prime minister, and Mordecai refused. And Haman was personally upset by this, and he actually convinced the king to kill all Jewish peoples on the 13th day of Adar or Adar. So that is considered like the 13th day. It was considered execution day, and it was actually chosen randomly from a lottery. And that's why it's named Purim, because that means lots in Hebrew. For once, my babo is asleep and is like really taking a good deep nap here. And while I'm recording, my damn rooster, Stroop, his real name, his name's Stroop Waffle. But we call him Stroop for short. He keeps like screaming in the background. I think it's because he's like able to run around outside, and he's like trying to get everybody, like all his ladies, to come outside with him, and they're all just kind of like chilling out indoors. It's just ridiculous, but he keeps like screaming for them to run around outside with him. He's being very not good at being on his own today. But back to the Purim story. So Mordecai was able to get a message to Esther through her ladies in waiting. I don't know exactly what they like, the people that helped her, like servants, I guess. But he was able to tell Esther what was happening by using those means of communication. And she decided through thinking about it and praying about it to appear before the king. However, this would be on her own terms, and it would be without summons from him, which is typically punishable by death. You can't just ask to see the king, even if she's married to him. I mean, look what happened to Queen Vashti. Good Lord. So she requested a feast with the king and Haman. And during this feast that he accepted, she asked him to spare her life and the life of her people. And she said she was under like attack. And the king was like, who would threaten my Esther? And she blamed Haman, since he was the one who kind of provoked the king to make such a decree. And whenever he found this out, she like revealed her identity and her background, and her faith. Whenever she did that, the king ordered Haman's death, and he actually replaced Haman with Mordecai as the prime minister. He also the king himself gave Esther the power to overturn Haman's orders. So she gave all Jewish peoples the right to assemble and protect self from those doing harm. And she did so on the 13th day of what was supposed to be Jewish persecution and execution. And everybody took up arms and gathered together and protected themselves in case there would be like zealots that would try and carry that out. And on the 14th day was the day of rest and celebration. It's considered a very joyous celebration, and something that's supposed to be like a symbol of safety and overcoming really, really horrific and scary threats and events. And bear with me here. Chag Purim Sameach, or Happy Purim to you if you celebrate. And even if you don't, I think it's a really powerful story to think about. Now I'm going to get into why we're all here today, which is Ostara, which is a Wiccan holiday. So This is one of the 8th Sabbats. So there's the spring equinox, Ostara or Eostre, which is an Anglo-Saxon goddess. We'll get more into her in a second. It's supposed to recognize spring and new beginnings. It's a festival that recognizes fertility, rebirth, renewal, and the beginning of an agricultural cycle. There is this absolutely gorgeous article. It's called Ostara 2023, The Beautiful Pagan Festival of the Spring Equinox, and it's by Amanda Breathauer. I'm including it, of course, just like all my other ones in the show notes below. I'm going to touch on several things that she discusses about Ostara. So there are, of course, lots of spring equinoxes practice in many different places. But Ostara specifically is Wiccan. It's part of the 8 Sabbats, like I mentioned before. And what's really interesting is that in Celtic history, there are 4 different celebrations. And then there are also throughout the year, for the globe, there are 4 different sun locations over the year during that rotation around the sun. So the Celtic holidays are Imbolc, Beltane, Lunasa, and Samhain. And then for the sun's locations, there's the summer solstice, the autumn equinox, the winter solstice, and the spring equinox. And so there was kind of this like squish together of everything, where it became the 8 Sabbats for Wiccan beliefs. So the spring equinox, or the vernal equinox, happens on March 20th this year, aka today. At least for the northern hemisphere, it's September in the southern hemisphere. On this day, there's Holi for Hindus. There's Alban Ieter for Druid. And I'm really not sure if I pronounced the Druid celebration correctly, because every time I try to look up Ieter, it says either. It always corrects me to either, and I just can't find it. So I'm really sorry. And then there's the Roman Catholic Carnival. And this, just as a side note, this Carnival might be related to Saturnalia. And I talked about this on the creepy origins of Valentine's Day, I think. And then, of course, I couldn't possibly forget Easter, although that doesn't happen until early April this year. It's actually really early this year. So what I think is really interesting was that in ancient Ireland, there were monuments that were built and then later used by the Druids that really pairs up during the equinox sunlight. It'll really line up with the sun. And then in Salem, New Hampshire, there are 5 4,000-year-old stones built by indigenous peoples or by European migrants. They're not sure. And it's considered the U.S.'s Stonehenge. Why have I never heard of this? Like, I've never in my life heard of this. And it's on the east side of the U.S. where, like, I live. So I don't know why that isn't more well known. But I think what's interesting is that those also line up with the sun and during the spring equinox and such, which I think is very interesting. So there are many deities associated with spring. There's Persephone, Aphrodite, Venus, Freya, lots of other ones. There are Mayan ancient ruins that when the autumn and spring equinox hits the steppes, there is a snake that's revealed that makes its way down the steppes. So something that I found interesting was that depending on the article I read, it would compare and conflate Ostara with Eostre, which this article by Amanda Breathauer says it's not the same. But, and there was an English monk named Bede in 725 that said that pagans observed and honored Eostre before the Christian Easter. And that maybe that's where the root of the word Easter comes from, but historians really are not in agreement about this. So I thought that was really interesting how similarly these words look and sound, and you would think that there would be a root between them, but there also might not be one at all. Also, even though it's not celebrated in March, it's kind of associated with the equinox and that rebirth and rejuvenation. But in Christian beliefs, Jesus, the Son of God, the divine Son of God, was said to die on the cross for all mortal sins and to take that burden. And then when he was crucified, 3 days later, he ascended into heaven and he brought all the souls with him. And he made that separation between heaven and hell. And that mortal sin would be automatically forgiven, and for those that share that belief system. And I think it's very interesting how much of an overlap there is between whether they're pagan holidays or Christian holidays or Neo-Druid holidays. Like, there are all these overlaps surrounding that common thread of like the birth, the rebirth and the rejuvenation of springtime, and that the death is over and that life can begin again. And I find that very powerful across the board. So what this author of this article talks about quite frequently is our intentions to bring with you in the year. So there are these intentions of purification, growth, transition, positive, intense energy, zeal, motivation, balance, birth, revitalization, good fortune, evolution, kindness, joy, fertility, and hopeful intentions overall. She made many lists. I just picked a couple of them to talk about on the podcast today. But some of the food and drinks that I thought were really interesting was honey, leafy greens, spring veggies, fresh berries, mead, herbs, eggs, seeds, bread, edible flowers, which I think would be really pretty on cakes and things. And then quiches, which I think is so fun because my husband, ever since, with the chickens and the eggs and all that stuff, he has been like, I want to perfect my quiche recipe. And he's been like really experimenting, and his quiches are so good. He'll make this delicious quiche and I'll eat like a piece of it and I'm like, oh my God, this is heaven. And he'll be like, it's not how I wanted it to be. And I'm like, I'll be your taste tester. There's no problem there. You keep on experimenting, my love, and I will keep taste testing for you. She also listed custards, maple, and hot cross buns. And not only does that make me think of hot cross buns from the 1 a penny, 2 a penny kind of like rhyme and like baby songs that I constantly hear. Also, if you haven't already checked it out, I do a whole thing about nursery rhymes and baby songs in one of the episodes, and it's just like ridiculous how creepy they are. And then, so the hot cross buns, I think of the baby songs, but also the 4 quadrants are supposed to represent the 4 seasons. And then some people say that came from the cross in the middle is supposed to represent the crucifix that Jesus died on. The colors, you know how much I love learning about colors and color theory and just like looking at colors and things like that. What's really neat is that the colors associated with spring are light green, freaking love green, lavender, I love any kind of purple. Purple and green are my favorite colors, so I love that those were listed first. Then there's sunny yellow, which I adore, light blue, pastel pink, and white. Animals that are often associated with spring or are kind of like sacred to spring are hares, chicks, snakes, robins. And if you want to know more about the robin, they kind of have a macabre background to them. But you can listen to my winter folklore episode. I think it's part 2. Yeah, it's in part 2. Bees, butterflies, the phoenix, which I love the story of the phoenix, and the ram. Symbols that represent Ostara can be found in bonfires, flowers, bunnies, eggs, seeds, baskets, buds, new growth, lambs, birds, and puka. I kind of don't know what puka is, so I'm going to look that up real quick. Oh my God. It's this is when it's like, what am I even doing? I know what a puka is. I thought it was a type of food. I was like so hyped up about food. I know these are symbols, but the puka, I have a whole episode about it. It's the Dark Horse episode, I believe, I go over how the puka can transform into a dark horse. Oh my God. Sorry. Wow. What a moment. Am I a folklore podcaster? Who's to say? It's like puka. I've never heard of this before. I really thought it was like, I thought it was kind of like yucca, like the food. It made me think of the food yucca. So I was like, oh, neat. Maybe this is something else, but whatever. Disregard that flub. Something else that I wanted to list that I think is really interesting are the crystals that are associated with Astara. So we've got fluorite, which is just stunning. Moonstone, which is also gorgeous. Silver, aquamarine. All of those look horrible with my skin tone, but they're absolutely stunning. And then the two at the end that I have little notes next to, which is really interesting, is clear quartz, which I'm like, hell yeah, that's what my favorite, I shouldn't say that out loud, but that's what my secret favorite crystal ball is. It makes the most sense to me. I have a lot of clarity with it. It doesn't like have a color to it because it's clear. And so I don't misinterpret some of the symbols or visions that I see while doing crystal ball readings. So I think that's pretty cool. And then Amazonite, and which I love. I did not know Amazonite existed before I want to say like before last year, but I got a dowsing pendulum with Amazonite at the end, and it works super well. So that's me being very woo-woo for you for a second. So she also talks about the intention of purification. So that can be seen in things like spring cleaning. Then there's the intention of balance that can be recognizing the balance between light and dark, because this is a day where the amount of light and darkness in the day, like literally in the day and night, is equally balanced perfectly. And then you can have the intention of grounding, and you can see that in new growth and buds blooming and roots digging deep into the earth and just being outdoors in general. And there's so much more. I think she has spells and stuff in her article if you're interested in things like that. And then she goes into more depth of all these different other lists that she has. So if you're really interested in that, I highly suggest her article. It was really cool to read. But something I was really surprised about was like no one was talking about any kind of egg rituals. Like it brought up eggs, like chicks or eggs being like symbols, of course, like of new growth and fertility and stuff. And I really wanted to spend time researching a little bit about why we have certain egg rituals. And I'm really happy to say, I know I brought this up in the last episode, but her fourth word is egg. She says it like egg, but she can say egg. And I got her those egg shakers where it's a maraca, but like it's an egg shape, and she adores them. So Mamo did pretty well, but I couldn't find anything about eggs, or like if I did, it was like really nebulous. So here's what I could find about eggs, and I still couldn't find why we egg hunt. So I'm not sure why that's a thing, but the pastel colors are supposed to represent new blooms, the fertility and birth. But there's many theories as to why we dye the eggs, not so much for the searching, but why we dye the eggs, especially for spring equinox or the vernal equinox, and for Easter, as the Christian holiday. So in Mesopotamia, apparently dyeing eggs red was supposed to mimic or represent the blood of Christ that he shed during his crucifixion. In royal backgrounds, King Edward I of England ordered 450 eggs to be colored and decorated with gold leaf and then distributed as gifts within the royal household as a celebration of Easter. So I thought that was a bit of some flagrant bits of wealth just tossed in there with the facade of celebrating Easter placed on top of it. And then there's 2 stories about Mary Magdalene, and the red egg specifically. There's lots of like red egg imagery here. She went on a trip to Jesus's tomb after he had died and was like buried in that tomb, or I don't know if you know what it's supposed to look like, but the tomb was kind of like this open cave type of thing or like a mausoleum, so to speak, with a giant boulder rolled in the front. Like that was kind of acting as a door. And she went to visit Jesus's tomb 3 days after his crucifixion. She brought those like hard-boiled eggs, and she was going to share that with the other women that were going to visit his tomb as well. But when the stone was rolled from the front of the tomb, Jesus had already ascended, and the eggs were reported to have turned a bright red. The other Mary Magdalene story that had something to do with the red eggs was when she went to spread the word of Jesus's ascension to Tiberius. He said, quote, "Christ has no more risen than that egg is red," because she's still, it seemed like bringing hard-boiled eggs or cooked eggs with them was like kind of a thing to do then, which I think is cool because I do the same thing now. But right as he said, like, Christ has no more risen than that egg is red, the eggs turned red. So I thought that was interesting. Something else that I think is cool is that Mother Mary, like Jesus's mom, not Mary Magdalene, but his mother, she brought eggs with her to provide like sustenance while she was trying to be there for her son's crucifixion. And it said that the blood that dripped from his wounds dripped onto the eggs and dyed all of them red, or stained them all red. And then there's another story that said that she was trying to beg the soldiers to be less cruel to her son, and she was weeping over her basket of eggs, and she was handing them out to people, and handing them out to the soldiers. And wherever her tears hit the eggs, it said that those tears bloomed into brilliant colors. So I thought that was some like very poetic and powerful imagery when it came to like the tears of Mother Mary. So that's all I could really find on it. I'm sure like maybe if I had done maybe a deeper dive, maybe I need to dig back into it to see like why we hide them, or the Easter bunny. The only thing I can think of is like how the Easter bunny came to be was kind of like related to all the new bunnies and hares and wild rabbits that you see. And that kind of like morphed into the story, but I'll have to look into it a bit more in the future. And I'm curious too, after talking all this talk of eggs, will you be coloring your eggs this year if you do like celebrate that way? Because I think I will be. And now that I know more about the symbolism behind the red egg and like how powerful that can be, I might be dyeing some of them like a bright red. And if you don't celebrate any of these holidays or the spring equinox at all, how has the first quarter of your 2023 been? I know that's like kind of a weird way to think about it, but you know, we're in month 3 of 2023 and so far mine's been pretty good. But I know that I'm going to hide some toys for my babo today for her to find. And as she finds them, I'm just going to be like, happy spring. So happy spring equinox to you. I hope it's full of balance and grounding and growth and rebirth. And I will talk to you next week. Thanks to all you spooky souls out there for listening to Creepycore and Folklore. Follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok if you're looking for more uncanny content. If you have your own tales to tell, you can email creepycoreandfolklore@gmail.com. If you liked this, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, or tell a friend who might enjoy these stories to spread the word. If you're interested in dark fantasy, check out my Hollowverse series. Ashes is available now in paperback and ebook on Amazon and audiobook on Audible, and the sequel is underway. I'm Iona Wayland, and I'll see you next time.